What's up, Fathom Church, and welcome to the Going Deeper podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Knight, and I'm here with Karina Bost. Hello, Karina.
Hello.
And Chris Martin. Hi, Chris.
Hey.
Hey, really exciting one here today, guys.
I'm thrilled.
I just had to start with that. We're talking politics. More politics here at Fathom Church.
I mean, is anybody ready for November 6th to come here? Because once we're past November 5th, it's like I'm back to, Geico commercials and, I'm just looking forward to then we're talking Thanksgiving, Christmas. I mean, it's going to be great.
Can't wait for my phone to stop blowing up with text
messages.
I was just saying the other day in our office that we share now with Aubrey was in here, and I just kept getting my phone kept going off, and I'm like, I cannot wait for this to be over.
I don't get any.
Oh, well.
I don't know.
Well, are you registered with a party? You don't have to tell that. You don't have to share that.
Anyways, okay.
You get any?
No, I haven't. You said that. I was like, I haven't gotten any this year.
Wow.
Which last time
your husband's doing something to make sure you're not getting any.
I'll tell you
of those.
what.
That's
you got
great.
some sort of in with the
you
state.
have an in.
Huh? Okay.
Okay. Hey, so we wanted to record a podcast more on politics. This is sort of maybe a part 2, or at least just an extension of this past Sunday's sermon in our 1 Timothy series. Pastor Chris talked about 1 Timothy. We kind of went back to 1 Timothy chapter 2, talked about politics a little bit. We're not going to go into that sermon a bunch, but please, if you have not listened to that, it's on the website, it's on YouTube, everything, podcast it. Listen to that, watch it, please. I do think it'll be very beneficial for our whole church to hear that and hear Chris's heart in that and hear our church's heart in that. So listen to that if you haven't listened to it already. But this podcast, we wanted to sort of kind of look at what was on the Colorado ballot and go through some of these things and sort of. Again, and I'll throw it over to Chris here in just a second, talking about the goal of this podcast. But we wanted to kind of take some of these policies and some of these things and that we will be voting on, and look at them from a biblical perspective, see what the Bible says about these, and talk a little bit about them. But Chris, talk about what is the goal of our time in this episode, and how should we start looking at all these things that we are going to be voting on pretty soon.
Yeah. So that's good. This is, we were toying with calling this podcast, the Fathom Voters Guide, lots of different, silly things. That's our purpose.
It's not.
Church. Our purpose is not to tell you what to vote for and what not to vote for.
Mm-hmm.
Back to what I said on Sunday, our purpose is to help you think biblically about these things. And so some of these things that are on the Colorado ballot have a lot of biblical backing. They're, like I said on Sunday, they are biblical issues. They're theological issues. They're not mere political issues. And then there are some things on here on the ballot that maybe we can loosely attach to some Christian or biblical morality that we might want to think about. And then there's some that it's just pure politics. It's pure administration. And you can just do whatever you want, really. There's not a lot of biblical backing. We'd have to really stretch.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I was studying and preparing for the sermon this last year, I heard J.D. Greear once talk about this idea that he uses at his church, where he talks about straight line and dotted line issues. And so he and this I think is helpful. A straight line issue is where you have a verse or a theological principle in the Bible, and you would say there's a straight line then to a policy or to an amendment or something like that. There's not it's pretty straight. It's pretty clear. It's the Bible says this policy or this amendment says this, and there's a pretty straight line between them. But then there are probably more often dotted line issues where maybe we have something in the Bible about, a principle about loving the poor, serving the poor, caring for the least of these. And then an outworking in a policy or an amendment that could indeed be a way to do that, to execute that principle that's biblical about caring for the poor. But it's more of a dotted line in how you get there, in that you could not say, the Bible says care for the poor, therefore we should become a welfare state. Like that would not be a straight line issue. That would be a dotted line issue. Of course, becoming a welfare state is one potential opportunity to care for the poor. But is it wise? Is it thoughtful? Is it considering the complexity of our nation? I mean, there's lots of things you could get into. And so it's not straight line, it's dotted line. And then there's some that just, there's no line at all. It's just like, hey, you can, I mean, it's just part of being American. You got to vote for some stuff or not vote for some stuff. So that's what I'd like us to do, is kind of work through the Colorado ballot, which I think the Colorado ballot this year is chock full of really important stuff and chock full of stuff that maybe is less important. But this is not these issues, these amendments, these policies are not things that you should look over. What's happening below the presidential line in this year's election, especially in Colorado, is very important. So
Karina, what are just your thoughts as we start this?
Wow, this was a fun one to prep for.
But now you know what you want to, I mean, you've done your voting work.
This is
now.
what I'll tell you. If you want to know what you should vote, pretend like you're preparing to do a podcast on all of these topics, and it will really help you.
I agree with that. Doing some research on this, I was like, well, I'm going to be voting for these things anyway. So it was.
Well, let's also say this. We're not experts in this,
Nope.
right? Like we're not political scientists. We don't really spend a ton of time in this. We're pastors, we're ministers, we're thinking through these things biblically. We might mess some of this stuff up. We might miss other thoughts and opinions. So this is not comprehensive. This is just the three of us kind of working through this on a Tuesday in the office. We hope this conversation will help you as you're thinking through your ballot in the next 21 days as we record
We
this.
hope so. And if it doesn't, don't listen to us. Turn off. But what I will say, though, is, again, if you haven't listened to this past week's sermon on politics, please do so, because we're encouraging you to think about these things, and we're encouraging you, and we'll probably say this at the end too, to pray about these things first and foremost. So so now that Chris kind of brought up this straight line, sort of dotted line, we'll go with that, because that kind of helps us organize these things a little bit easier. Let's talk like straight line things first, because I think these just might take up the most time, and maybe are some of the most important things. Some of these things that we can directly look at Scripture, at the text, to help us understand how we should be voting for these certain things. So I'm going to throw it out to either of you. Which one of these things on the ballot do you see as a straight line sort of issue that we can look at the text and see how we should think about this and how we should think about voting for this?
I'll take that. I'll just start.
Go for
I'll
it.
take the easy.
Let's start it. Take the easy one.
First of all, kind of one thing that's floating around our country huge is abortion, the right to abortion. And I don't have which number that is. I just wrote down.
It's Colorado Amendment 79.
Thanks, Kyle.
I've got it all here. If you want
I love
me to
it.
read it all.
You're going to be our
I've
our
got
fact
it all.
checker,
I've
so.
literally
wrote down the
copied and
title.
pasted
Okay.
a lot of things. So
This one, humans first and foremost, in Genesis 1:27 says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them." So straight from the beginning, we are image bearers of God as humans. And if you're wondering if an unborn child is a human, in Psalm 139:13-16, it says, "For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it well. My frame was not hidden from you, and when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book it was written, every one of them, the days were formed for me." So I think both of those verses prove like the sanctity of life, that we are valued and that we are humans from the get-go. And so this, in my opinion, is a straight line that it's one of the commandments, do not murder. And so there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think this one's, if we were to say the easiest, I think it is the easiest one, in that Christians historically, biblically, have always been pro-life. And the amendment to the Constitution is openly pro-choice. It is protecting a constitutional amendment a protected right for women to have abortions. And so, yeah, I think this is a straight line issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I would not have said that as strongly about other past legislation around abortion, because legislation around at what week and, you know, the different kinds of things to curb abortion or to limit abortion. Sometimes you could maybe make an argument that certain laws aren't good enough or certain laws don't take it far enough. This is not a law. This is an amendment to the Constitution concerning abortion. So yeah, I would say this is a straight line issue. And I think Christians should be pro-life.
Yeah. And just because I put down copied and pasted a lot, for those wondering really the specifics of this, this is Amendment 79, Right to Abortion and Health Insurance Coverage Initiative. And so what I found here is it says this initiative, this will just hopefully give you a little bit of background on the specifics of this. This initiative would provide a right to abortion in the state constitution. The initiative would prohibit the state or local governments from denying or impeding the right to an abortion and allow abortion to be a covered service under health insurance plans. So that's the specifics of this one, but yeah, I agree with both of you on that. This one's a pretty straight line.
Yep.
Pretty straight line.
Yeah. And then I would say the only other one that I think is a straight line on the ballot, I think there's a lot of dotted lines, but I think the only other straight line is the amendment that's repealing that wants to repeal the definition of marriage.
Yeah, you want me to read that one too?
Well, sure. Yeah, you go ahead. Read that.
This is Amendment J. It's remove constitutional same-sex marriage ban amendment. And really, yeah, a yes vote supports removing the provision of the state constitution that says that, in quotes, only a union of one man and one woman shall be valid or recognized as a marriage in this state. And then a no vote opposes removing that provision from the state constitution.
Yeah, so the thing about marriage that we would believe biblically is, again, what Karina quoted from Genesis 1, that God made us male and female. He created us these two genders, and that marriage is then a man leaving his father and mother, clinging to his wife, and the two becoming one flesh. And so biblically, marriage is one man, one woman becoming one flesh for one lifetime. But I would even say more than biblically, historically, anthropologically, this has been what marriage is. So a redefinition of marriage, in my opinion, is an overreach of governmental authority. So I think it's a pretty straight line issue. Again, this is not a law. This is an amendment to the Constitution, removing what has been in the Colorado Constitution for however long, that marriage is only defined as a man and a woman in that union. So this again is a pretty straight line issue in my mind. I don't know. What do you think, Karina?
No, I definitely think it's a straight line. My notes were almost exactly the same as yours.
Yeah. Genesis 2:24 is that, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh.
Yep.
Yeah. Again, these seem like more of the easier ones that we can just go through. And
listen, these are big ticket items.
Yes.
These are big ticket items. These are heavy items. No question. But there's not a lot of good argument against them not being biblically informed, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, they're about as straight a line as you can get in American politics. How we define marriage, how we define life, how we define sex, those sorts of things. Yeah. It's pretty much a straight line.
Yeah.
So maybe it'd be helpful to get into some of the dotted stuff, because I mean, there's a lot of other stuff that I think is, I mean, even though I would personally weigh them as less weighty, like back to my sermon from Sunday, those are two big weighty items, but there are other things on here that might be less weighty but some of them might be weighty for you. Like you might have some extra, investment into some of these things. So why don't we just start kind of walking through some of these? And I don't think we need to spend a ton of time, but just to say, is there any biblical, theological worldview issues that we should consider when mulling on what way we should vote on these things.
Yeah. I mean, I could start off with a couple.
Okay.
We could, from our list, I'll start at the top of our list. The property tax exemption for veterans. Again, I think there's maybe a couple other ones. Like there's always exemptions and tax stuff all over this thing. But maybe this one specifically, it's Amendment G. And so this is really a yes. Let's say a yes vote would have supported expanding the property tax exemption for veterans with a disability to include veterans with individual unemployability status. And so a no vote would have opposed expanding the property tax exemption for veterans. So, what do we do is something like this? Like we're talking about property tax is really not explicit in the Bible, but then there's a lot about still loving your neighbor, all this other kind of stuff. What about this one? Could we kind of see a little bit of a dotted line there?
What do you think, Karina?
Just some biblical principles, like we're called to care for the needy. We're called to care for those those who have needs that we can help meet. Galatians 6:2 says, bear another one's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. But also at the same time, when you read this law, it's like Chris quoted Tim Keller on Sunday, like there are many ways to get there. Is this the best way? I don't know. That's where you kind of have to do the deep work yourself and say, do I think this is the best way? Is this not? And sometimes, like you said earlier, sometimes the law doesn't go far enough, or sometimes it's worded in a way that you're like, what does that mean? Yeah.
Certainly the principle of caring for people in need is a biblical principle. Like we can all agree. Christians should agree on that, that caring for those who are in need, specifically those with disabilities, those with financial needs, all that kind of stuff is a good thing. Now, that's probably as far as we can go in terms of a Christian worldview on this. Yeah, property taxes, is there, I mean, certainly biblically, acquisition of property is a belief. So having property, personal property is a biblical belief. Paying taxes is a biblical belief, right? Caring for people's property when they are unable to do it themselves. So like even the return of property to somebody who's passed away, to the family. Like there's some Old Testament stuff that we might be able to dotted line to something like this. But beyond that, I would feel like it becomes an opinion, becomes a matter of conscience. So you need to do your work, read the amendment, think about it, maybe read some commentary on it, and then decide what you want to vote on. But that's where I would say the biblical worldview informs this one.
Yeah. Okay. Semi along those lines, really, of just tax things. We were kind of talking a little bit before this about the sports retained sports tax betting revenue, Proposition JJ.
Double J.
So voting yes on this, a yes vote supports allowing the state to retain tax revenue collected above $29 million annually from the tax on sports betting. A no votes to oppose that. So again, and there's a lot of other details about where this would go to, all this other kind of stuff. But Chris, another kind of tax thing. What do we do with this?
Well, so this one feels a little different to people because it's dealing with taxes that are already being collected on gambling. And so, which is ironic because we have a podcast in the hopper specifically about Christians and gambling. So we'll get to that. But some would consider that an unsavory activity or a questionable, it's not property tax. It's not sales tax. It's not, it's taxing something. It's like taxing cigarettes or taxing alcohol. It's something that people would say you should tax that because it'll maybe be a deterrent from people doing it as much or something like that. So, but the question on this one is interesting because it's not about taxing more. It's about, can the state keep more of the tax as opposed to returning it to the casinos and to the organizations that get it. So, in terms of what does the Bible, again, like what does it say to us? It doesn't say much more than, probably wisdom around gambling that we don't have time to get into today, but we'll get into in a future podcast. And again, the state does have the right to tax her people, and we render unto Caesar that what is Caesar's, So, yeah, that's about as far as, again, like I would want to go on that. Is any further than that, and we begin to get into issues and matters of conscience. But I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts on this one, Karina or Kyle? Like that's just kind of that's just kind of what I got.
That's kind of what I
That's
got.
kinda what I got.
And I felt like it was closely related to the firearms and ammo. It's a little different, but kind of similar.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. There's a couple that I want to talk about here. One, and I mean, we can kind of loosely relate these two together, but we don't have to. One, we'll start with this one, the parole eligibility for crimes of violence. So that's Proposition 128. A yes vote on this supports requiring offenders convicted of certain violent crimes on or after January 1st, 2025 to serve at least 85% of their sentence before parole eligibility. So what do we, again, with this, when talking about violent crimes and really like the punishment for that, but this specifically talking about parole eligibility, Chris, what do we do with something like this?
I mean, this one's tricky because, again, this one moves into some of the minutia of our judicial system and how it works. I would say that there's probably some things to think about. One would be justice. And do we think through just punishments for crime versus unjust punishments for crime? Now, again, I'm not going to make commentary on whether this is just or unjust, but I think that's something to consider in this. I also think it's probably worthwhile to consider, like even some of the Old Testament prescriptions around like sanctuary cities and forgiveness for people who have committed certain crimes and things like that. How one goes about justifying oneself in this life, not like in a salvation way, but in this life, due to mistakes or even, intentional crimes that they've committed. So I don't know. This one doesn't feel like it's, I mean, if this is a dotted line, it's very, there's like a big gap between dots. I mean, it's pretty, it's a skimpy dot to me. I don't know. What else? Did you think of anything else?
No, yeah, just,
Karina?
I mean, God is a God of justice. So justice needs to be served, but how and when and what that looks like in the minute details of how long someone served and whatever the crime, I don't know, that God is a God of justice, but what does that look like in our current context and how it's played out in the judicial system? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. It's
Think about it.
I think you got to think about it, maybe read about it,
Yeah.
and then do your best to cast a wise vote.
Yeah. This other one, I feel like kind of goes along those lines a little bit, but it's the bail exemption, Colorado Amendment I. And a yes vote on this supports removing the right to bail in cases of first-degree murder when the proof is evident or the presumption is great. So the amendment would make first-degree murder an unbailable offense. So this I feel like is, I don't know, kind of on like maybe a different level, because this is like I don't know, this is talking about it's talking about murder, it's talking about obviously sin, but making it an unbailable offense.
Yeah, I think there's this one for me comes down to like the way that the balance of powers work in the United States. As we think about the Bible, there were judges, like there were people who were, I mean, even we think about Moses and then Moses' father-in-law coming to him and saying, you need to, set up smaller groupings of judges within your people to help deal with disputes. At some level, that's a very simplistic version of this, where there are judges who get to make decisions, and do we heed the decisions of a judge or do we not? So I don't know what you should vote on this one about. Like, I don't know what your answer should be, but I think you should think about who gets to make decisions for during trials, during sentencings, things like that. Like, how much freedom do they have? How much of that is defined for them, and are their hands tied when it comes to sentencing when it comes to extending bail in this case, that sort of thing. That was the only place that my mind went from a biblical worldview was in terms of how judges execute justice. But I don't know.
I also thought of just like protecting the victim.
Yep.
In that sense, which is kind of where my mind went. So it's just kind of a flip side of that a little bit.
Okay.
Does this actually protect victims? Does it? I don't know. But I kind of just had that thought, like just biblically, that biblical thread.
Yep. I think that's good.
Karina, I'm going to ask you, what's another one that you've got some thoughts on? I've got a few.
Okay, this one was just the most interesting one. And I think it's another like very loosely dotted line, but the prohibiting of big cat hunting.
Yes. This is my favorite thing that's on the ballot. I mean, just because of how silly it is.
Yeah, it just is.
Although it's comparable to the wolf thing from a couple of years ago. That's really, I mean, as I've read into it, it feels very much in line with that. Am I correct? I don't know. Did you guys read into that, the same stuff? I think it has, doesn't it have to do with ranchers and recouping losses and things like that?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. So under this, this is Proposition 127. Under this initiative, mountain lions would, and it's got like, this is big cat. I'm putting it's mountain lions, bobcats, lynx. So under this, mountain lions would no longer be considered big game. This would have the effect of making mountain lion livestock incidents ineligible for big game damage claims by the Colorado
So
Parks
there's the
Wildlife.
rancher piece.
That's the rancher piece. I'm trying to think of anything else that's important about this.
You can still
exemptions.
I think the wildlife service could still put down a big cat if it needs to.
Yeah,
but there's no longer going to be tags.
Correct.
That you can put in with the game service.
And there's some exemptions such as like killing a big cat to defend human life. Also non-lethal methods for defending livestock property, motor vehicles, all that kind of stuff.
Cool. So what'd you think on this one?
Well, I just thought of Genesis 1:28 that God told us that we are to have dominion over the earth, basically care for it. That doesn't mean like control everything,
right?
But be mindful of the care of the earth and the care of its creatures.
Yep.
And I think there's arguments on both. Like I've heard arguments on both sides of this using this exact same verse.
Yeah.
So. Very interesting.
Yeah, because you can care for the earth by saying you shouldn't kill big cats. And then you can care for the earth by saying, well, you might need to control the population. You might need to protect your assets. There's so asset protection comes into this conversation. I mean, there's lots of pieces, but you're right. It feels pretty like a loose dot line.
Yep.
Loosely dotted line. I just think it's.
But one of the more interesting ones, I guess.
I don't know, man. Last one they were introducing wolves. Now they're not killing.
Those have been in the
They've
news
been all over
lately.
the news, man. Now they're trying not to let us kill cats. I mean, you know how I feel
You're
about cats.
You're in trouble, man.
It's an interesting thing. But I think those are the right things to think about, Karina, especially as we're thinking from a biblical worldview. I think that's good and right.
Do we want to talk about school choice, Amendment 80? So a yes vote on this supports some of these following, and I'm going to go through these pretty quick. A yes vote supports the following, providing in the state constitution that each K through 12 kid has the right to school choice, providing that all children have the right to equal opportunity to access a quality education, and that parents have the right to direct the education of their children, and defending school choice to include neighborhood schools, charter schools, private schools, home schools, open enrollment options, and future innovations in education. And a no vote opposes creating the constitutional right for school choice. School choice, big one. I think. Chris, what does Scripture tell us about education, school choice, those sorts of things that we should be thinking of for this one?
Yeah, so this one I think is closer actually to a dotted line than to a screwy dotted line. Okay, and here's why: parents are told to raise their children.
Proverbs 22:6.
Yeah, Proverbs 22:6. Raise your child in the way that they should go, and they will not, guide their feet forever or whatever. That's a loose interpretation.
Get their feet or whatever. Yep. Just
Shema in Deuteronomy 6. Yes. When you rise, when you teach these things to your children. So parents are given the mandate to raise their children, to educate their children, to bring them up. Now, that does not mean that public school, private school, charter school, homeschool, like, doesn't mean you have to do homeschool just because it's your job. It is your responsibility to oversee that, to make sure that your children are raised appropriately in the ways of the Lord. So school choice, I think, is a part of, okay, you could say that's a dotted line issue. Whether a family can choose a school, whether the funding from your tax revenue goes to that school or not, that certainly could be considered a dotted line issue here. Now, there's a lot, I mean, we were talking about this in staff meeting earlier. There's a lot of like, what could happen if this amendment gets passed? So you've got to do some research on this, friends. But it certainly is your responsibility as a parent to educate and raise your children. You don't pawn that off to the state, okay? But that doesn't mean that you can't send your kid to some organization that helps educate them. So that was what I was thinking from the biblical worldview. Yep. I think this one's closer to a dotted line than to it's not a straight line for sure, but it's certainly not as screwy as Big Cat Game. So
yeah, and even I would say, even if you don't have kids right now, if take some time to really pray about this and do your research on this for sure.
Did you have anything else on that one, Karina? Okay.
I did not.
Yeah. That's what
But we did a whole podcast on school choice.
We did.
If you want more information on school choice.
We did.
Good one.
I believe, and maybe there's a couple other like really, I'm saying smaller ones, very dotted line ones. Funding law enforcement, Proposition 130. Any thoughts on that one? Karina, do you have any thoughts on that one? Since
let me see. I can't.
Proposition 130, under this initiative, the Colorado State Legislature would be required to appropriate $350 million to the Peace Officer Training and Support Fund, and the funds will be used for the following purposes: increasing salaries, trainings, retention, hiring additional police and law enforcement, funding education for law enforcement, lots of those things.
I think I had just, this is kind of more loosely, but God is a God of peace. Like enforcing peace is important. Law enforcements do that sort of work. But once again, how you interpret how that's done and what's best.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my thought was, I think first responders, specifically police and military, are a part of the governmental structure that God has put in place to push back evil in this world. And so I think that's a biblical theological principle that we can consider, that we would believe that the police and the military are good. There are forces of good that God puts in place in this world to help push back the forces of evil, like in a real practical way. So there's actual practical theological reasons to fund the law enforcement. Okay. Now, again, I am not making any commentary on this law because I don't know enough about it. I've not really dug into it enough to know whether this is actually good for policing or bad for policing. Sure. I don't know. You need to do that work, but just know that Christians do support law enforcement. That's actually a part of God's good gift of common grace to this world.
Yeah, and even part of this that I didn't read, this initiative would create a death benefit of $1 million to surviving spouses and children of those killed in the line of duty. So that's, again, caring for the least of these.
Yep. Widows, orphans, that kind of thing.
Widows, orphans, all those things. I think we got like a couple more. There's a couple more. Hold on, I'm getting up there. Judicial discipline. Amendment H. This judicial discipline cases would become public once formal proceedings begin rather than confidential. So this would, I think, call for a new board.
And they're not allowed. And then it disallows judges from having influence and oversight over discipline cases of other judges. So again, whatever you want, do your research on this one. But here's what we can think about. God is a God of justice. Like I was thinking in Leviticus 19, that he wants just weights. He wants just balances. Like he wants things fair. So if we see things that we would say are not just, that's probably a problem. Okay. Right. Additionally, there are always these distinguished, like we've talked about, like, it's like separation of powers in our country is actually a biblical idea, like the king and the priest being separate. Like there's this, we do need these checks and balances that are kind of built into this. So I think that this is a dotted line issue, but there should be checks and balances for judges and for the judicial process. And so, yeah, I don't know whether or not this actually will help with that or not, but that certainly is a biblical principle for sure, to my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, as much as that one is like maybe it's a really dotted line, but it's still important to think, to read, to do your research, and to be wise in your voting. I think I have one more. Established veterinary professional associate. Chris, you want to explain that one?
Yeah, it's like a new position, a regulated position, veterinary professional associate, requiring a master's degree. Okay, so the closest we could get is creation care, maybe with this. This is very dotted. Maybe a dot. So
yeah.
So here's where I would say I don't think there's a lot of matter of biblical conscience that goes into this one, and I think it's okay to be like, this is just kind of your opinion. Use the brain that God's given you. Yeah. It doesn't have to necessarily be directly associated with this. There's another one that Kyle skipped because he's not very, which is modifying constitutional election deadlines, which I know is a big ticket item for all of us. But it's like moving dates earlier for certain election deadlines and things like that. Again, yeah, I mean, Karina, we were joking beforehand that you were like, God's a God of order. Yeah, he is. But that's not there's just no, like, okay, do you want it to be a week earlier or not? Like, you can just make a decision on some of these things. Read about them if you want to, research them, and then vote your conscience. But I wouldn't get too overly, like, we don't need to shoehorn the Bible into every one of these.
And I think that's important to kind of end this off with talking about those things that aren't explicit in the text. There's not going to be those things, and we don't want to read these and go, as a Christian, I have to find it. And if it's not in scripture, what do I do? And we freak out, all this stuff. Do your research, think, be wise about these certain things, and know that not everything that we are voting on today in 2024 is in scripture. So,
but also, like, if you do the work and you study and you figure out what you want to vote for, and then the policies don't end up being what you thought they were, like, don't beat yourself up over that. We can't foresee, like, some of these amendments that make way for new laws. We can't foresee what it will lead to. We can just use the best information we have now, using our biblical lens to look at them, and then praying through how we vote, and then just vote to our best of our abilities. And that's all we can do.
Yeah. I agree.
That's right. I totally agree.
I mean, I just agree. Like, I think these are important things. Yep. It's not, there's big ticket things on here, things that we need to think through, things that we need to pray through. And this is, the heart of the king is in the hand of God, well, God is in control of this stuff. Yep. So we do our part, our civic duty, our responsibility to our beliefs, and then we just trust the Lord. So,
yeah, that's good. I think, and to go back to your sermon from Sunday, our first priority as a church is to pray, and followers of Jesus is to pray. So pray about these things, pray about policies, pray about the people, and yeah, hope this was helpful. If it wasn't,
you just wasted 40 minutes. But friends, like, think about these things. I'm thankful that we can talk about these things. Yeah. Again, we're not telling you what to vote for. I hope you hear that. We're not telling you what to vote for. But yeah, this is what we do. We think things through biblically.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say, no more talking politics, but we still got.
We'll talk to you in 4 years, friends.
Yeah. And we'll do this again. Hey, thank you guys for this conversation. It was great. Now I'm ready to go vote.
Let's vote.
Okay. Thanks, church, for listening. We'll catch you next time.